This again is the Wakefield meeting for the Wakefield Small Area Study. Thank you for being with us tonight. We're going to talk through the draft recommendations of the study. My name is Hannah Reckow. I'm a senior planner with Raleigh's Planning and Development Department. A few other members of the project team here on this meeting, including Christopher Golden, Jason Harden, and Carmen Kwan. And then we also have Eric Lamb here from Raleigh Department of Transportation. So we're going to have a presentation to walk through the recommendations, some polling questions throughout we hope you'll participate in, and some Q&A. And so without further ado, I will pass it off to Amanda Morell, who's the project manager on the consultant team side, led by Stantec. Amanda.
Thank you, Hannah. I appreciate that introduction. For everybody's benefit, I'm going to turn my video off so that my audio stays strong throughout the presentation. So I encourage the rest of my team to do that as well. And we will jump right in. So thank y'all for taking time out of your lives to be here with us tonight. We are excited to share the initial recommendations from the Wakefield Small Area Study. But first, Hannah mentioned we're going to be asking you a few questions, and we'd like to start with a quick little poll question to sort of understand who our audience is here tonight. And, you know, these are not anything to be intimidated by. There's not a right or wrong answer. We just are a little bit curious about how long that you've lived in, owned a business in, or worked in the Wakefield area. So choose the option on your screen that sort of best describes yourself. We'll give everybody a few minutes to answer, and then we'll actually be able to launch the answers in real time. Looks like we've got a fair number of the folks in attendance have answered. And just for everybody's knowledge on the call, we are recording this call and we'll be posting it on the project website so that folks that couldn't be with us here tonight will have the opportunities to both watch the presentation, look at a PDF of the slides, and answer some of the same questions. So with that, it looks like we've got enough to sort of end that and share the results. Wonderful. Very good. So a lot of us are long timers, and a little bit of folks that don't live or own a business in Wakefield. So thank you to all of you for being here, no matter how long you've lived or worked in the area or not. We're happy to have you. So to kind of kick us off, I wanted to share a little bit about kind of an initial kickoff meeting that we had as a team, both the city staff and the consultant staff, kind of brainstorming about, you know, what is the scope of this project and what are some of the key issues that will likely come up during this planning process. And so, of course, you can all imagine that managing the cars kind of came to the top of that list. And while that's going to be important, we also want to think about other modes of transportation moving in and through this area, including pedestrians and cyclists, making sure we're providing, you know, safe facilities for those folks that are choosing to get out of their car and experience the Wakefield area. Also, I mean, what a fantastic part of the city with great open spaces and amenities, natural amenities, and the existing Greenway along the Neuse River with the potential to add to that Greenway system was definitely going to be something we wanted to take a closer look at. Certainly evaluating the potential of new development in and around the area, and sometimes that looks like redevelopment in some ways. And then ultimately making sure that we're encouraging a cohesive design aesthetic, whether it's in a public infrastructure project or perhaps ultimately in a private redevelopment. So I do want to take a moment to introduce you to our thought leadership team, who I'm happy to say are all here with us tonight, thankfully. So Mr. Craig Lewis, he has served not only as principal in charge, but he is also our leading policy planning expert on the team. Mike Rakowski is also with us tonight. He leads our complete streets and multimodal transportation team for this project. He's an engineer and planner, which is pretty rare, so he brings a wonderful perspective to the project. Melissa Ruiz. She's an environmental scientist in our Raleigh office, and so she has brought a great knowledge base and perspective, making sure that we're sensitive to the environmental needs of the area. And Bert Fox has served as a subconsultant to Stantec throughout this process and has been just a tremendous asset, both in analysis and as we're moving toward implementation. So to take a little bit of a walk down memory lane, it's been a bit of a quick process. So we launched this back in March, and we're sort of towards the end of July at this point now. Really, after this meeting with some additional public outreach I mentioned afterward, we're going to be wrapping this up toward the end of August, moving into September. So that's exciting. Before we sort of get into the recommendations, I did want to sort of set up the area today so that you understand sort of what our scope was related to sort of the study area and also kind of our initial impressions of the area today. So we did a very thorough existing conditions analysis that will be part of the final document that you can take a deep dive into. But as planners, we like to start by sort of zooming out, right, and understanding the context of where Wakefield sits within the city of Raleigh. So, we're just about 10 miles north of the heart of downtown Raleigh, which situates you really as sort of this bedroom community of the city, with a little bit of a longer commute time than maybe the average in Wake County, but still a very desirable place to live. Certainly with a more affluent population than the rest of Wake County, the data tells us as well. But as part of this, we also did this sort of cursory market review utilizing a product called Esri Business Analyst to take a little bit of a deeper dive into understanding the market, the demographics, the lifestyle groups that are located within the Wakefield small area. And just some kind of key takeaways from that, I already sort of mentioned this more sort of affluent population, but it's an affluent population of younger families than really the surrounding area. We all kind of know, I'm sure on this call, that the areas to the north and to the east that are continuing to grow have certainly impacted traffic volume and patterns in and through Wakefield, something to certainly be aware of. And what was interesting, sort of as far as a demand driver goes, is that population is going to become younger and more diverse over the next couple of years with even more families. So that's a fantastic projection looking forward. And really the main sort of key finding from this market analysis memo was that while Wakefield has this high quality of life, there are certainly ways that we can sort of facilitate the infrastructure in the area to support that healthy, active lifestyle that this demographic group is really looking for. Places outside that families can gather together and make memories. I mentioned early on that we have Melissa Ruiz on the team helping us make sure that we're noting all the amazing environmental features of this area, including Richland Creek, the Neuse River, and how all of those pieces sort of tie together from both a hydrological standpoint, but also, a contiguous open space standpoint as well. And just so we sort of all are on the same page about what the study area boundary was, everything you see highlighted in white on your screen right now really was the extent of the study that we were charged with taking a look at. So we also wanted to share, prior to the recommendations, some of the things that we heard through the public engagement process, which was such an important part of this planning effort for the city. We also have summarized all of that as part of the final document, so you again can take a deeper dive into that. But just share some of the main takeaways. We started this process by reaching out to your first responders, your school district leaders, your HOA presidents, people who really know this area well and could offer, great insight to us as, we'll call us outsiders, so that we could start to understand the area. And some of the takeaways from those initial meetings included this sort of desire to enhance that multimodal transportation network through the area, finding ways to utilize those existing stream corridors and really exploit them in a way that is respectful of nature, but also allowing access for people that live in the area and want to visit the area. Another thing that we took away from those conversations were what we call sort of place-based comments, right? So they were able to tell us, where they've seen people speeding, Falls of Neuse Road comes to mind, certainly. Wakefield Pines was another corridor that we heard quite a bit about, particularly from the school system, noting some backups that tend to happen during pickup and drop off. So all of these things gave us sort of a base of where to start when we went out and sort of boots on the ground took a look at some of these issues so that we could try to offer some advice about how to combat them. The next level of public engagement was really a broader sort of outreach effort, and that was a public online survey. And we had great participation. Nearly 300 folks in the Wakefield area took this survey, offered their input, and we asked some really pointed questions. And some of the takeaways from that, I love sort of the image at the top left of your screen. This was a question we asked, where would you take a visitor that came, to see you in Wakefield that really is special to you? Clearly, the Neuse River Greenway and Falls Lake and the dam and, all of those beautiful natural assets were a key sort of place that folks really just love. Another question that we asked towards the end of the survey was, describe the future of Wakefield in just a couple of words. And so the larger you see the word in this graphic, the more times we heard that word in people's descriptions. So you can see, walkable, green, preserved, sustainable. So lots of great aspirational things that we wanted to keep in mind as we were moving towards recommendations. We then launched the next phase of our more general public outreach, and that was an online open house. We collected a lot of great information based on sort of the reaction of the public to our initial analysis. But we wanted to dive in a little bit deeper into the details of design, understanding, we hear that you love the Greenway and you want to see that expand, but what does that mean? What does that look like from an amenity standpoint? So helping us figure that out and what things were most important to folks was really important. Also sort of understanding, do people think it's a worthwhile investment to sort of retrofit some of these corridors so that they can accommodate other modes of transportation? And we sort of overwhelmingly heard that yes, it's a worthwhile investigation. Streetscape elements, you can see that, two safety pieces ranked very high, both the widening of the sidewalks and then those high quality crosswalks are really important to folks as we think about some of these transformations. Again, looking at that sort of land use and development potential, we had asked folks in that initial survey, would you like to maybe explore the possibility of a walkable mixed use village in the Wakefield area? And you can see, almost 80% of folks said yes. Well, we kind of took it a step further and said, okay, you told us you want to see this, but where does that sort of make sense to you? So folks marked on a map and we sort of had some takeaways from that experience. We also asked folks about gateways, right? Because we heard initially that a lot of the respondents felt like Wakefield didn't necessarily have this sort of sense of arrival or gateway. And so we wanted to understand if that did happen, what are the design elements you would like to see as part of that? So we're actually at our next poll question. So we're curious if you've participated in some of the outreach that I just went through. So what describes your participation so far? So were you a participant in our online survey, the open house, maybe both, I hope, or is today your first day kind of stepping into this process? And if that's the case, we're happy to have you as well. Once we get to an almost complete vote, we can launch those results and see what kind of mix we've got here. The percentages are telling me that quite a few of you did the online survey, so I'm happy to see that. All right, getting close, Craig. Okay, excellent. All right, so half of you participated in the online survey. That's fantastic. Both the online survey and the open house, a fair number of you as well. And we've got one newbie, so glad to have you participating tonight and getting up to speed, so to speak. Very good. So the first set of recommendations we want to walk you through really are related to mobility throughout the Wakefield small area. And, Mike and his team did a fantastic job of really trying to understand, the existing traffic patterns based on the data that they had at hand. And what they do a lot of times, with that data is kind of compare it to statewide averages. You can see, unfortunately, maybe that the crashes on Falls of Neuse Road are sort of 1.4 times higher than statewide average. So that was definitely something of note. We're at 3 times higher than statewide average as we move closer to Capitol Boulevard. So all things to keep in mind as we start to think about, slowing cars down through this corridor, making it safer for people. Mike and his group then kind of take it to the next level of almost sort of grading or assigning a rating to these major corridors in the Wakefield area based on what levels. And so this map in particular looks at, what is the level of service being provided to bicyclists on Falls of the Neuse and Wakefield Pines. You can see that, unfortunately, they're sort of not making grade right now, and that's okay. That just means there's room for improvement. The pedestrian level of service is a little bit better. We characterize it mostly as fair in and through the Falls of Neuse Road. And a lot of that is attributable to the fact that there are some existing sidewalks while there is the opportunity to hopefully widen some of those facilities in the future. I'm going to let Mike Rakowski step in for just a moment and share a little bit about a diagram that we called a preferred access plan and how it evolved over the process. Mike?
Perfect. Thanks for unmuting me. Again, my name is Mike, and Amanda did a great job, a wonderful job, really telling you what the people had told us and a little bit more about what the data is telling us. Real briefly, this is what we call a preferred access plan, and how does it all fit together? If you saw the first version of that, you would notice a lot of gaps in the system. One of the things, the key takeaways from what the people have told us and the businesses along the corridors have told us and the institutions is that we really want to support walkability, right? And so when you look at this map holistically, and you look at the Wakefield Pines and Falls of the Neuse, those circles represent kind of walk sheds. They're 2.5-minute walk sheds. They're 1/8 of a mile walk shed areas, right? And so what we tried to do is kind of close the gap in a lot of our recommendations. So when you look at some of the high quality intersections, those with the dashed red circles around them, what that means is that we're advocating high visibility crosswalk, pedestrian countdowns, pedestrian level lighting, shade trees, those things that would indicate to a driver that, you know what, they need to slow down because they're more apt to see someone on 2 feet or 2 wheels trying to cross the road. We also need to be cognizant that transit goes through here. So there's a lot of people on foot or on a bike trying to get through this community. And so that's important. One of the other things that we also noted in our data collection, we took some speed studies. Along Wakefield Pines, we didn't see a whole lot of speeding along there, but again, school's not in session either, right? But along Falls of the Neuse, however, we did note some speed differential, higher apt for higher speeds and especially during off-peak. So, and keep in mind, there's a lot of topographical challenges along this corridor. There's a lot of areas that have sight problems. When you come around a corner, you can't really see that car taking a left or that person walking across the street. So we tried to close the gap on a lot of these intersections. Here's a great example between Old Falls of the Neuse and the elementary school entrance. You may not know this, but there's no high quality crosswalks there that are protected. That's 2,000 linear feet between those two signalized intersections. So we had to close, we had to close that gap. A lot of the recommendations we have, here's one that's being circled there. We actually put in what we call a hawk signal to allow people to go across with an actuated signal that'll actually stop traffic so that you can get across the road safely. So a number of things we're looking at along each key corridor to close the gap on crossings, even healthy connections to the Greenway system. That's the Neuse River Greenway that Amanda alluded to, as well as the Richland Creek Greenway, and getting under Falls of the Neuse, hopefully even a path that goes under the two bridges at that location. So lots of good connectivity. We'll share that with you in a moment.
Awesome.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you, Mike. Perfect. That was a great overview. And Mike mentioned that there are some of these what we call spot improvements that he mentioned that I really want to share with you sort of graphically what that means, in the community. So this is that spot along Wakefield Pines Drive that Mike mentioned, sort of the entrance to the high school and middle school. And we heard anecdotally that this kind of is the crossing that most of the school age children prefer to use that are coming from these neighborhoods that are sort of beyond the trees, right? There's a lot of walking and biking to school that's happening, which is fantastic. So we've got to sort of do a great job at making sure that that's a safe experience for them. You're doing some good things here, right? We've got, a designated crosswalk and sort of an indication through signage that this is a place that people need to pay attention to. But with a few small design adjustments, that hawk signal that Mike mentioned, so that the pedestrian, the school age child, can press a button that will, make the cars stop, give them time to get into the refuge, take a moment, make sure it's safe to continue crossing, a can of paint to sort of accentuate these high quality, high visibility crosswalks, ADA ramps, making sure that all of the safety measures are in place, accentuating this refuge island with some additional pollinator plantings, really would make a big difference to the amount of safety that we're providing for folks in this area. So one of the things we, like to do is look at those system level connections when it comes to mobility. And Greenway Connections were one we really felt like it sort of deserved its own graphic, right? Because there are some things that are going on simultaneous to this plan. So the Greenway master plan for the city is actually being updated right now as well. And so, Hannah on the city side is going to be working really closely with that team to make sure all of these sort of detailed recommendations that are coming out of this plan are incorporated into that citywide system. So that's fantastic news for everybody who loves to hop on these greenways. And we heard that, 80% of our survey respondents really are using those for recreation purposes, which is fantastic. So we certainly have the greenway that moves along the Richland Creek corridor. We had a few little additions to that actually help complete what we feel like is a great loop, bringing folks back up to Falls of Neuse Road. We've got some spot improvements there that I'm going to share in just a moment. But we really felt like it was important to accentuate this crossing here at the Neuse River to get people to that fantastic amenity that you all have in the area. Another kind of, concept that we wanted to explore as part of this process is thinking about the median, right? That, is sort of a calling card for the Wakefield area. It, changes width in a lot of places, and in some places it might not make sense, but we feel like it's a worthwhile investigation to see if a multi-use path could potentially be worked into that median in some way, and add to the placemaking and sort of the identity of what Wakefield is. So we talked a little bit in that diagram about the Richland Creek corridor, and that's really a high priority corridor for the Greenway master plan moving forward. But, you got to cross Falls of the Neuse Road, which is sort of a bear to cross, particularly when you're talking about a bridge that's going over the creek in this area. And so Mike, in his bravery, decided to sort of take one for the team and investigate this in a real sort of tangible way of, is it possible to actually sort of sneak the greenway underneath the bridge? Is there enough clearance? Would it be safe for folks? And so, we're kind of happy to report that we really do think it's a feasible concept to sort of explore further as you move towards, making this a real project. Incorporating public art on the bridge and, the posts, and incorporating lighting and additional planting, making sure that the surface is something like a concrete so that when this area does flood during heavy rainstorms, that it's not going to wash away, right? And this would just be potentially a very unique and authentic place for folks to sort of traverse through the Wakefield area and really know that there's somewhere special. Another crossing that Mike mentioned is, again, trying to get folks safely across Falls of Neuse Road in one of these areas where the median is particularly wide. And this is a Greenway connection that, Melissa and her team, really working with Mike, sort of brought to the attention of the overall process. And, another great area that potential Greenway expansion could happen both to the south and to the north up to the schools. But we've got to figure out a way to do it safely, right? There's, clearly not a signal here. This is what we would call sort of a mid-block crossing. But utilizing something like that hawk signal that we saw over on Wakefield Pines Drive at the school in a situation like this could also allow folks to cross this area in a safe way because they would be able to push a button. The signal would turn on and cars would have to stop and allow their safe crossing. This is also clearly an area where we've got topographic change, right? So we're going to have to sort of meander and condition, but that really adds to the charm and the overall experience. Another great thing, and I'm going to flip back to the previous slide, is that we've got this existing culvert here that clearly has, some erosion issues. And so again, seeing that as an opportunity, right? One of the reasons we selected this area was because we do believe through riparian buffer plantings, additional large stones and boulders that really speak to the river and what is so special about this area could be a great sort of mid-block crossing for a future greenway. Now, the Greenway is not the only thing we focused on. We wanted to layer in the actual on-street or adjacent to street network, which we call the Bikeway. And so Mike did a really detailed job of kind of looking at some of the proposed bike facilities that you all have on the books, in addition to some new ones that he felt like were really sort of key connectors, and making sure that those were all connected with those high quality intersections that he described earlier. So to share sort of a detailed view of one of those bike drive, really more sort of a neighborhood type street. It's got a buffered bike lane on it today, which is fantastic. It's kind of that first layer of safety that we can offer to cyclists and pedestrians on the sidewalk. But we feel like that there may be an opportunity to enhance that even more with, some bollards and a little thing we call an armadillo. Those are the little items that are attached to the asphalt to allow, that additional protection from moving vehicles and keeping them from moving into that bike lane and ultimately up onto the sidewalk. So again, adding to that placemaking idea of, banners on those existing lights and additional plantings along the roadside, all tied together, creating safe streets for everybody to share is a really, a great opportunity. Now, we talked a little bit in the beginning about some feedback we asked for related to the gateway into this community. This is kind of your moment, right? Folks cross the river, they're on Falls of Neuse, and boy, they start, you can see from this before, feels very wide open. It feels like there's nothing really to kind of slow you down as you're entering into the Wakefield area. And we really think that with a few design interventions, we could sort of change that experience for folks. So this is a little bit of just a concept of what something like that might look like. And so I mentioned, thinking about expanding that sidewalk all the way to the back of the curb, but accentuating the edge with, almost like a rumble strip for cyclists, embedding some river pebble into the actual concrete so it doesn't move. It's not something that, kids could pick up, but it does indicate to cyclists that, you need to sort of veer back into the safe zone within the side path. Layering in those bollards and armadillos again for cyclists and folks on the side path, additional safety there. We did hear that there was this interest in public art and additional enhanced landscaping, and so encouraging pollinator plantings Mayweat area would be a big enhancement. And I mentioned this idea that it felt really wide open through here, and so we actually utilized the existing guardrail to think about this idea of, a lighting element or a colorful sort of signal to folks that really does start to provide a sense of enclosure to motorists as they're coming into this area, indicating, you're coming to some place that's really special, and we need to slow down just a little bit. And you're indicating that in your signage, right? You're announcing to folks that come to your community that this is a pedestrian and a bicycle friendly space. So Falls of Neuse, again, I mentioned during the overall sort of Greenway conversation that, certainly exploring the median as an opportunity to inject a multi-use path that might be meandering with additional landscape and plantings would be something, we could encourage you to take a look at. And then the intersection of Wakefield Pines and Falls of Neuse Road. So if this was a downtown, right, this would sort of be your main and main. We like to think of it that way because this is a place where a lot of school-age children are crossing. We heard sort of over and over again that walking after school, they're crossing this intersection to get over to the McDonald's or the Italian restaurant. And so we want to make that as safe of an experience as possible. There's the possibility to extend that sort of median space into what we call a refuge to give folks that, may not can cross in, one signal timing, a moment to sort of stop in the middle, collect themselves and then continue to cross on the next iteration of the light. Improving those crosswalks, making sure that all of them are high visibility really in and throughout that intersection. And the opportunity to enhance pollinator plantings and lighting through this area as well. So when you layer all of those things, when you layer the greenways and the bikeways, you end up with this fantastic system that does a lot of the things that folks really wanted to see. It's this more walkable, bikeable community that is really well connected with both neighborhood streets and greenways. So we've got a couple of poll questions on this section. The first being, with some of these proposed improvements that you've seen related to, intersection improvements, crossing improvements, would you walk or bike maybe a lot more, a little bit more, maybe about the same as today? Or would these improvements really not change how you walk or bike through the Wakefield area? All right. Do we have almost everybody answered? Can launch those results. All right, very good. So it looks like, 40% say that this would, make you walk or bike a lot more, which is great. Some folks, this wouldn't really change how they walk or bike in and through the area. Very good. We will stop sharing those results. And the next poll we're going to launch really is about, the potential that future bus stops might be in this area, and with the proposed improvements to walking and biking, and that being a safer experience, how likely would you be to walk or bike to one of those future bus stops? Highly likely, somewhat likely, or not likely at all? All right, looks like we've got everybody. All right, so most people would probably not walk or bike to those future bus stops, but a few of you might be somewhat likely to. That's great. All right, water resource management. This was really sort of Melissa's wheelhouse of sort of investigating both the hydrology as well as sort of the stormwater facilities that are in and throughout the area. You can see the existing stormwater control measures are indicated with that purple triangle. And as many of you know already, there is a tremendous amount of hydrology in and through this area. In addition to the Neuse River and Richland Creek, you also have other smaller tributaries and creeks running through as well. So we think about stream preservation and restoration, we really, would encourage that, focus that sort of preservation on city-owned land and easements, particularly along Richland Creek, which is a high priority for, future Greenway. Certainly more detailed stream assessments would be needed on any, stream corridor that is going to, anticipate having a Greenway constructed. The images on the right, the bottom three are really a great representation of a Greenway and stream restoration project that Melissa and I had the opportunity to work on in Winston-Salem, where we were improving, the Greenway situation on some public property, but also, restoring the streams and creeks through that area as well. Because the ultimate goal is that we're improving water quality in the watershed. Now, when it comes to stormwater, there are what we would call traditional stormwater control measures in place that have, been installed over the last few decades, dry and wet ponds, and those function, just fine. We do have sort of a list of best management practices from other communities in North Carolina as well as nationally that not only control the stormwater and handle it responsibly, it also ultimately might improve the water quality. And so, we've provided a list of these to the city in addition to some precedent projects so that, they still would have to do very detailed investigations, right? What is the soil like to make sure that some of these facilities are possible. You also have to look at budgeting to make sure that those facilities fit within a project's budget as well. Now, redevelopment scenarios is kind of the final set of recommendations we're going to walk through. So we want to start certainly, with the zoning of this area. And, most of the sites that we were looking at were already zoned mixed use according to the city's current zoning map, which is fantastic because that means that, there's this opportunity for vibrancy as part of those mixture of uses. Next, we sort of took it to sort of a soft side analysis level where we wanted to sort of understand, where it is developed previously, what are those areas that are vacant or unimproved, and then what, lands really fall into that publicly owned or controlled property bucket. And, as you can see, and I'm sure most of you anticipated that there's only a small amount of green on the map in front of you today that is vacant or has never been improved. So through the public process, what we heard, and I shared a little bit of this in the beginning, was that, folks wanted to see and wanted us to explore as a design team the potential to create a walkable village center in the Wakefield community. Open house participants took that a step further and offered us some examples of sites that we might, want to take a look at where, a mix of uses, perhaps, certainly the creation of public gathering spaces might be possible sometime in the future. So we sort of got to work. We conducted an internal design charrette where we investigated that potential at the Wakefield Commons Shopping Center site. Now, this is sort of an example of what we call a suburban retrofit, right? And suburban retrofits are basically looking at a very auto-focused shopping center, whether it be a mall or a center like what Wakefield Commons is that has a couple of different big boxes. And you think about those in a new way. How can you make those into walkable villages without really sort of, destroying everything that's there already, sort of building upon it? And a lot of times you can achieve that by, putting some additional buildings on previously paved areas, starting to create that sort of pedestrian scale block structure, the gathering places for people. This is a great little before and after image at the top of, taking a piece of the existing parking lot in Wakefield Commons and re-envisioning that as a public gathering space, over time as a center like this evolves. And certainly, retrofits like this often encourage a mixture of uses that bring that vibrancy that I mentioned earlier. So we heard, we investigated, and what we found was that really a transformation of this nature, particularly on a site like many of the sites in Wakefield that are, really recently developed, it's going to be a challenge, and a challenge for that reason, but also based on current site requirements. We think additional conversation around this is certainly warranted, and, an approach that balances that desire for an urban tree canopy while also what comes from an auto-centric area really into a walkable, vibrant village center. So just to share a little bit about implementation before we wrap up and allow y'all to ask some questions, all of the implementation sort of strategies are based around 3 main goals. So we really feel like each of those is important for, a very specific reason. So supporting healthy living, right? Those, capital projects I shared with you that are going to increase the ability for folks to get out and enjoy the beautiful amenities that are in and around Wakefield, while also increasing safety wherever we can with those sort of spot improvements, but also, the key crossings that we mentioned are going to be a critical path item for achieving some of these goals. Ensuring long-term economic viability. That was another thing we heard anecdotally was, whatever you can do to help support, local small businesses in the Wakefield area, because so many of them are so loved by the residents that have been here for a long time. So whatever we recommended, we wanted it to sort of meet these 3 goals. And then from there, the matrix, we'll call it, for implementation kind of falls into these 5 buckets, whether it's land use, transportation, parks and rec, open space, those capital projects I mentioned, and even thinking into the future, as these centers evolve over time, potential to add urban design guidelines as part of that to sort of set the framework and stage for what you want Wakefield to sort of continue to grow into. So those capital projects I mentioned, that sort of bucket, we want those to definitely start meeting the 3 goals that I laid out on the first slide, right? So, are they achieving healthy living in the community? Is it a safety implementation project? And is it also at the same time supporting the viability of small businesses and how people are accessing those small businesses in and through the area? So our last poll question, we are, kind of excited to hear what you think about these different capital projects that I've shared tonight during our presentation. And the city wants you to help prioritize these projects. So we've got that Richland Creek Greenway connector, the one that sort of skirts under the bridge. We've got the Hawk signal there at the schools. We've got the gateway improvements just as you cross the river coming into Wakefield. We've got the Midblock Crossing at the culvert there on Falls of Neuse, the very sort of, straightforward safety mechanisms that we can put in place on Common Oaks, and then the intersection improvements at Falls of Neuse and Wakefield Pines. So I'm interested to see, tell us, what are the top 3 out of this list that you would tell the city to, definitely sort of investigate further as you move toward implementation? You can select up to 3. All right. There are 3 very clear winners. So
I'm excited to see the results.
I'll be interested to see when we combine these results with the results from the next couple of weeks of folks getting on and voting for these projects as well. It'll be interesting to see if there's a change. All right.
Give folks just a few more seconds here. We have everyone represented yet.
Okay. And if it's not allowing you to select the ones you want, feel free to type those in the chat and we can log that information in as well. All right. This is one you definitely have to think about a little bit. All right, let's launch those results and see. All right, excellent. So that Richland Creek Greenway connector for sure, the Hawk signal at the school, gateway improvements, and that high quality intersection. So definitely got the most on that, Mike. You'll be glad to know that a high quality intersection won out. So very interesting. So next steps for the design team, both the consultant and the city. So we're going to be posting this recording along with the set of PDF slides that folks can kind of take a look at. That'll be happening tomorrow. So I encourage those of you who were able to join us tonight to sort of share that link to the project website. Hannah's going to actually drop the link to the website in the chat box, so you can kind of copy that and save it so that you can send it to all your friends and family to have them participate as well. That'll be loaded tomorrow. A survey that actually mimics the questions you answered tonight will be available along with that recording until August 13th, because we really, we understand that not everybody can sort of give up their evening to join us, and we understand that. So we want to give people some time to participate and expand the number of results we're getting. Then city staff will share the findings with City Council and Planning Commission for their review moving into September, and they'll be able to actually work these recommendations into the comprehensive plan for the city. So thank you for taking time. We can turn our videos back on, the design team can, and we can answer any questions that might have come up during the presentation. Hannah's going to help us kind of field those questions and toss them to the expert of choice. And city staff, feel free to jump in and answer any that might be more in your wheelhouse. All right.
Well, I noticed that Chris had some passionate thoughts in the chat, and certainly would welcome to sort of open the unmute to be able to do that if you'd like to do that.
I do have one question about speeding on Wakefield Plantation Drive.
And that one definitely was outside of the study area. We do note it, and we captured that as part of the public input. And so it's definitely something that, we're sharing with Eric and the rest of the city staff so that they're aware of that issue.
Okay, I'm unmuted, I think.
Yes, we can
Yes.
hear
Can you
you,
hear me?
Chris.
Yes,
All
thank you.
right.
Yes.
All right. Oh, this is extremely frustrating. I don't want to dump it on you. You're all nice people who've worked hard to make this presentation. I totally understand that, but I just feel there's so many questions. Plus, I just feel like it's so off base. It's as if it's tantamount to you coming into my house that I've lived in for 20 years and saying, "Oh, I'm going to remodel." It's like, yeah, it's just there's so many links that are missing. As I was trying to type in, first of all, where is the money coming to pay you for all of this survey stuff and for this project you're talking about, when we have been asking for so long for things to be finished here and be told by the city that there's no money? For example, our Forest Ridge Park, that has been in development since we built here. My daughter was in kindergarten. She's in graduate school at MIT right now. So, this is how long it's taken for us to get the first part of Forest Ridge in. And that parking lot is filled all the time. There's no connection to Forest Ridge. We go through the neighborhoods. How do you get from the Falls of Neuse Greenway to the Forest Ridge Park, which would be very, very useful? The most convenient way is to go down Old Falls. Now that is not on your, that's not part of your design. Apparently you haven't been given that as your corridor, but that's the efficient route as a cyclist. Who we biked here, our bike club uses. We have to go down that stupid little sidewalk on New Falls to get to the little curvy way to get down there. You can't go down Old Falls anymore. You couldn't 20 years ago when there was no traffic. You can't do that now. If the Corps of Engineers would release just a little bit of the side of that road, and you have a direct connection between the Falls of the Neuse Greenway and the Wakefield Greenway, and then ultimately Forest Ridge Park. We also need phase 2 of Forest Ridge Park finished. And we've been told, we don't have that money because Marianne Baldwin is going to take all of our money. You've talked about how you think we're all so wealthy up here. Well, we do pay a lot of taxes. And Marianne Baldwin is going to take all of our money, and she's already taken the money that has come in from the pandemic funds, and she siphons it right into downtown. Everything is going into downtown. And Dorothy Dix, the golden crown of Dorothy Dix. So, you know, I sound a little jaded here. Well, it's been a long time for these things. So I love all your bright ideas, but I just don't know where this is coming from, why the Greenway has to go, you know, under Falls and zippy zoo around here when you can simply go down Old Falls, or you know, make a Greenway section off of New Falls. That's very direct. We need a direct way to get to the river and to get to the park down there. If you want to do this little wiggly wig thing later on, fine. You know, maybe in another 30 years, I'll be dead and gone by then. I've waited a long time just to get the tiny little things we have. Our HOA spent a lot of money to put, by the way, monuments at our entranceways. You're saying we have no gateway. We put monuments in. We wanted a big monument right in the center. The city told us we couldn't do that. It was a traffic hazard and blah, blah, blah. They wouldn't allow it. So I don't know how they're going to allow you all of a sudden put this great big sign that says Wakefield. And I think it's also very tasteless because it doesn't match the monuments that we have in this sort of old Southern design, which, you know, I don't care anything about it, but at least it's consistent with what we have elsewhere. What you are designing is not consistent with the design that had put in by Wakefield developers 20 years ago, you know, which is that, you know, the old brick looking type of thing, which is old Raleigh. You know, so that's just part of my frustration. If you're going to spend money, I mean, what you're talking about has to cost a lot of money to make this village, this sort of Cameron Village, whatever you have going. That means to me as a commercial development. And why isn't there a commercial development doing that? What, is the city going to do that? And why are they going to spend the money on what you're doing and what your designs are and not finishing what we need? We have this little disconnected Greenway that is part of the city system. And it's been half done. The developers half did it because the city made them, because I called them, because it was supposed to be put in the original design 20 years ago, and they conveniently never put it in. So, you know, they were forced to do that. They didn't do a good job. Now the city's piecemealing, the Greenway system is piecemealing, trying to put it back together. The signs are falling down and rotten. I called to ask about that, and the fellow who heads the Greenway said, well, it's way down on our list. We don't have the money to fix the signs. So, I mean, just on a small thing, if you don't have the money to fix the signs on the Greenway, where is this coming from that you're talking about? Okay, I'll shut up now.
No, you're fine. You're fine. We appreciate the input. Hannah, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. I can appreciate. Yeah, your concerns about the ongoing projects you're seeing. I can address the question about the origin of the study. So the city does conduct small area studies like this pretty regularly. They're budgeted during the budget process by city council. And this is one where the district council member had heard from some community members that there was an interest in and a need for this type of a study along this corridor, this portion of Falls of Neuse corridor. And so a budget was allocated for this study, and that's how, you know, this process has continued. In terms of funding and implementation, you know, it's not all going to happen at once. There's a way. I think I saw our air claim. Unfortunately, I just had to head out. But there's a method for prioritizing and budgeting that, you know, does take some time and some advanced planning. So unfortunately, we don't have one big pot of money to do all of this. Another comment I was going to make, which was, you know, the images that the design team put together, those are conceptual. So if that sign looked ugly to you, doesn't mean that's what it's going to look like at the end. It's more trying to evoke the idea that we're presenting. You know, Amanda, give any other thoughts?
I agree, you know, with all of that, and I appreciate the input on the design of the gateway. I think, you know, that's the level of input we need and that the city needs to be able to create something that is sort of authentically Wakefield, like you said. You know, we're not married to any of, you know, the colors or the materials or anything like that. All of that would be decided sort of much later when it became an actual sort of project. I so appreciate your comments about the connectivity to the open spaces. And I know that Mike is like itching to talk about this connectivity map and the old Falls of Neuse, you know, proposed multi-use path and how important that is to this overall system. I started screen sharing again, Chris, so I hope you can see that overall connectivity map.
Yeah.
But Mike, would you talk a little bit about the thought process when we were
Sure.
you know, taking a look at this?
And I love the comment. Forest Ridge Park is great amenity. I've gone along the Neuse River Trail and the park itself. And so we did, in fact, advocate for an extension of that. Totally makes sense, Chris, to connect all the way down there, close the gap on that.
Yep.
That's one thing. And that's great because it can be done within the right of way, we truly think. So that's good over there. Most of the other, like the key critical, let's face it, we do a lot of complete streets and Vision Zero. A lot of the things that folks are complaining about, it's just simple things like crossing the road. The greatest things about the recommendations that we're showing these high quality crossings is protect those people. And guess what? It doesn't require a whole lot of right of way. In a lot of cases, it doesn't require any right of way. That's the beauty of these. We got to come up with low, high impact quality improvements to really make this a safer place. And honestly, if speed is the number one issue, right, we got to tackle that first. And you know, like I go back to the gateway, it doesn't matter what it looks like, but we want to tell drivers, and I'm one, and Chris, you're probably guilty as well, coming up Falls of Neuse Road, you know, who's kidding who? And we just hammer that, and it feels like a dragway coming up Falls of Neuse. The terrain and the speed, you're just going over 45 miles an hour. We've got to introduce mechanisms to slow people down and let them understand they're going to see people on 2 feet, pedestrian, bicycle, even folks waiting for the bus. But though a lot of these are low hanging fruit, number one. Number two, we can use a lot of existing easements to build them. The 70% of any major project, roadway or greenway, is contributable to right-of-way acquisition. So if we can use already existing right-of-way footprint, if we can use easements that are privately owned or publicly owned, like the one you see exactly in the trail that goes all the way down the transmission lines, we can cut a lot of that cost. Here's the beautiful thing. If you can recognize 60% of these improvements, just 60, you are absolutely hitting a home run with these. So let's be patient. Let's prioritize what's important, do the low hanging fruit, and it may turn out to be Old Falls of Neuse extension of that trail. I love that idea. And it may be intersection improvements too, which costs no money towards right-of-way acquisition. So now I'll keep quiet.
Well, first of all, we would really like to see our park finished up here, Forest Ridge Park. That is a priority, and I would like to see the city prioritize those things that have been on the list rather than taking our money on a park bond and giving it to Dorothy Dix. And we don't need buses up here. As somebody else already mentioned, we watch these big lumbering buses come through Wakefield with no one in them. We are not going to take a bus downtown. And Mary Ann Baldwin does not understand that. The day she was elected, I listened to her interview. She said, she told the reporter, we are going to make parking even more difficult downtown and force people to ride the buses. this, this is what's wrong is, first of all, we are in the city of Raleigh, and we're not acknowledged as part of the city of Raleigh. That's the number one problem. It ends at 540. And then up here, we don't exist. And so all of the things that they talk about with the buses and building cottages in your backyard and all the stuff I read in the NNO has nothing to do with us. And yet, as you've noted, we are a high tax base. We get nothing back. It's all siphoning down. Why we want her out of office? I'm sorry, but we have a representative up here. No one's listening to him. No one's listening to us. And so I as much as you're just hearing such frustration out of me, and I know I read next door, listen, read the posts. People are so frustrated with what has been happening over the last few years in our relationship in North Raleigh and Wakefield in particular, because we were annexed. I personally my husband and I were one of the first people that bought in Wakefield, and our first address was Wake Forest until we closed. We were annexed, yet the city takes no responsibility for what we are up here. So we need some of our projects finished before we talk about these other issues. And I haven't been on the HOA for a while, but I know our HOA has been concerned with the gateway and the presentation and a lot of the things that you've talked about. This is all commercial property. And we can't, really, tell them what to do. So,
Right.
Crossing the street is obviously important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can tell that Bert is feverishly typing because, she's one of the folks that's helping us really try to sort of strategize implementation. And so I think that your comments are going to go sort of directly into our thought process behind that. And, our recommendations to the city about, prioritizing some of those projects you mentioned that have been on the books a little bit longer. So I just thank you for being willing to share and sort of, tell us, some of the things that have been going on, and I think it'll help make them better. So thank you.
Many people here do bike. We have a high cycling community. There are some bike clubs. People actually have to drive down to the parking lot to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
We have to drive down with our bikes as close as we are to the Falls of the to the Neuse Greenway,
Really?
Or you go down that little sidewalk, and that's the number one priority. We were very happy to see the bike lanes go in. That was like the super surprise, great thing. But the new issue is, and this involves enforcement, is that people have decided that pedestrians are using it as a second sidewalk. And as a cyclist, and I'm 71 years old, the bike path is important to me. It keeps me safe from cars, I figure. But if I have to go out into the road to go around all the people who are walking on the bike paths, it's no longer safe.
Absolutely.
And once I was accosted when I asked somebody to move off please move off the bike path. So, that's the next problem. We have no police enforcement up here. I don't remember the last time I saw a police car in Wakefield. Again, we are somehow not part of the city. So whatever you do, there's no enforcement of it. So the bike paths for me, they're wonderful. At the same time, they become dangerous. It's another problem, and the pandemic, of course, helped that, because when we were all trying to social distance, people got in the habit of going down on the bike path to go around people walking on the sidewalk. Now, they just have continued that process. So, that's another plan. So this, again, back to the bikeway, that, well, I forgot what you called it, that long path that goes way down around the Richland Creek thing.
Right.
No one who is a cyclist who wants to go down to the main Neuse River is going to use that. That is just out of the way. It's a nice little leisurely path in the neighborhood, which I think it's beautiful. I just wouldn't see it as a priority at this point for people who want to get down to the park. And I think connecting these parks is crucial, and making this and making a bikeway so that we have 20. I know from working on the HOA, we have 2,700 residences, and that means, and that doesn't include all the people who live in an apartment are one. They count as one. So, and then in each household, there's multiple of that. So, we have thousands of people here that need to move around. And yes, the walking is important. However, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to ever become really walkable. No one is going to walk from my neighborhood in Stratford Hall down to those shopping centers. I mean, there's just no reason to do that. But you're going to bike.
Right.
Now,
Actually asked some
Very-
folks during the process about how they use how they bike and walk around the area and what they use that for. And a good portion of folks do so recreationally, but we did also hear a significant little portion of folks that walk and bike to get to the destination.
well,
area.
the older community is on the lower end where that Richmond Creek area is. That's where a lot of the older community is, in those patio homes. They do walk up from there. They don't necessarily cross Falls of Neuse to get to that area. And you're right. There are also there are two senior living facilities on the opposite side of Falls of Neuse. Those people do need to cross there. They cross with walkers. I've seen them crossing with their scooters, and that definitely is important for that group of people. For the people a little further away, not so much. I use the Greenway. I walk every day. My walking route is up through the Greenway on our Greenway path. It's definitely a mile, 2 miles within the core of Wakefield, which is not on your study list at all. And that's where kind of the large group of people live and walk. I mean, I walk every day. I watch walking.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. I just saw a note in the comments. The staff's helping me keep a track of time. More than happy to continue this conversation, Chris, if you'd like. I'm offline. I can give you my email or
Sure.
but I did want to open it up to see if we had another.
Yeah.
I had another
please.
question that came through to me directly for some reason, but thank you for the question. It's about speeding on Falls of the Neuse, approaching the bridge and on the bridge. So Mike, again, I'm going to call on you because I know that you went out there, like you mentioned, with the speed gun, and Falls of Neuse was an area where you really did note some speeding, and part of our recommendations may be to lower that speed limit in and through there.
Yeah, correct. And that's a great observation. I don't know who asked you that question, but it is true. So I personally went out there and had a speed gun trying to hide behind places to take a look. And what I really saw speeding was coming off of that bridge. Let's face it, there's no friction. There's nothing to slow them down. There's nothing on the side to create that sense of enclosure. So I did notice at Waterloo Park and Village Pines that people were coming around. It's 45 miles an hour. So if you're going kind of northeast direction, coming across that bridge going north towards Wakefield, I did notice that the speeding got 50 55 and even some cases 60 miles an hour flying through there, again, because they don't expect people, they don't expect cars on the side, there's no friction. So the only way, as an engineer, you know, the only way, and I'll put on my video, apologize. The only way that we control speeding, to be honest with you, is through design. You can't have the police
Right.
out there,
Right.
and you can't have police out there. They're not going to monitor 24 hours, 7 days a week. That's unrealistic. And that would cost a tremendous amount of money. And you can't put a sign out there. You just can't say slow down for kids. That just doesn't simply work. And I wouldn't trust that. You got to have visual cues, and you have to have physical and potentially physical improvements to really let people realize they need to slow down and they can expect people. And that comes through potential changes in the curb. That comes through visual cues like Amanda alluded to and Hannah did early on with the gateway feature. Again, I don't care what you put up there, just let people know they need to slow down. And even the sense of enclosure with the bollards that she had in there to bring a buffer between the proposed side path as well, that between that and the travel way are just a couple of those. You're going to be limited, mind you. One of the things we are recommending is a new signal at Village Pines Lane. That's the first key intersection, all-way intersection that you hit or that you contact with as you're coming northbound on Falls of the Neuse. And so a signal is probably the best way to kind of introduce, yeah, you need to slow down. We can control some speed that way as well. So I hope I answered some questions on that one. A lot of great ideas out there, but we are a little bit limited, I would say, at this point.
Thank you, Mike. Any other questions? Let me check my direct messages. Let's see. Don't have anything coming through. Again, you know, this is not the last opportunity to sort of give us some additional feedback. This will be posted on the website. I encourage you, particularly those who know others that live in the area, your friends and neighbors, to encourage them to share their thoughts as well, so that we get a really broad sort of spectrum of opinions across the community. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment there. And with that, Hannah, I think I will turn it back over to you to wrap up.
Sure. And actually, before we do that, I did want to acknowledge I actually got by email some comments from some folks that are listening in by phone.
Oh, great.
Comments and concerns about change that the Raleigh City Council made sort of citywide. There was a change to the zoning ordinance, what we call a text change. And this is what's called the missing middle text change. So it was aimed at allowing a little bit greater variety of housing types in some of the residential districts that we have throughout the city. That would allow a slight increase in kind of the density that's allowed in some of these districts, provided that it's an appropriate scale and size and spacing for the neighborhood. So just to sort of talk through kind of where that was with this process as an area specific process, that one was being written and was sort of still in review and kind of still up to change a little bit during some of the last phases of this project. But it is now finalized and City Council voted to approve it. You know, as I mentioned, that's something that's going to apply citywide. I think it's probably more likely to affect more like the downtown areas of the city. I think it's probably relatively less likely to impact an area like Wakefield. It has to do with how new the current development is. There isn't a big pressure to rebuild houses that have been built very recently, and a lot of them have their original residents in them. And then the other comment I wanted to make about that is that those changes don't override private agreements like HOA bylaws. So if those do exist in the area that specify so building type, this change wouldn't override that. So I did just want to make that comment. And I don't know, have got a request for someone by joining us by phone to make a few comments. And it looks like we just have one caller. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute.
Thank you for unmuting me. I appreciate that. A couple of comments. The people here in Wakefield have heard about what you just described. That city ordinance was passed, again, without any input from Wakefield. So to reiterate and to put an exclamation point behind what Chris said, we feel absolutely alienated and very unwanted by the city of Raleigh. Chris is absolutely right. North of 540, we don't exist, and I'll be quite honest with you, north of the river, we don't exist at all. Matter of fact, neighbors here were absolutely buzzing when they heard about Buckhead in Georgia seceding from Atlanta. All of a sudden, there was a lot of discussion up here. That shouldn't happen. We should be represented much more aggressively by the city council. We've been, to Chris's point, a net exporter of tax dollars for so long that it's going to take a lot by the city, not just a couple of monuments and making it pretty, but a real dedicated effort to go through and to bring this community back into the fold, if you will. We don't have police coverage up here. The police coverage, it takes approximately 9 minutes, according to the police officer I spoke with, for them to go from the station, the substation that services our area here in Wakefield, to get here. 9 minutes. Unacceptable. So one of the first things I'd recommend to you is that we look at safety from a different perspective altogether, and that is, let's get some cops up here and hopefully even put right next to the fire station a small substation that allows police officers to be and have a presence here on a routine basis. Number two, you were talking about speeding, Mike, on Falls of Neuse Road. You're speaking with the guy, and specifically his wife, that actually worked with Charles Meeker to go through and to get the bridge in that allowed for the development of the road. So we know quite a bit about that. As a matter of fact, my wife actually cut the ribbon back in October of 2011 to open that bridge along with Mayor Meeker. Bottom line is that at the end of the day, that is a secondary arterial, and it has become a junior Capitol Boulevard. I'm not sure you're really going to be able to go through and to put another traffic light in there without creating more and more congestion. So you've got a congestion issue on a secondary arterial that was designed basically to offload overflow from Capitol Boulevard down into the city. And that's exactly what it's being used for today. The volume of traffic on there is enormous coming in from Wake Forest, Zebulon, and all points north within Wake County. It's a drive-through zone. You're not going to be able to go through and just put design up without creating more and more congestion, just like you have up at Wakefield, up at Capitol Boulevard and New Falls of Neuse. That intersection there is a classic example of what's going to happen. And it's going to just filter on down as you go through and you create and put more stop lights or stop signs or more impediments in there trying to reduce it. I think you got to think a little bit differently. You got to think about, pedestrian bridges. You have to think about flyovers. You have to start thinking at, a longer scale here and at a much greater scale than you're currently thinking about. We have 3 schools here in Wakefield. As you know, we got a campus. One of them right now, the elementary school, has a crossing light there where children can go through and actually push a button and cause the traffic to stop. I suggest that you start thinking about having one up at the high school, or even 2, because the students are crossing and they're going to go back to school and they're going to start crossing back and forth. And you need to put something like that in there again, or you need to put speed humps in that make people slow down. on Wakefield Pines. You need to do the same thing at the middle school, at Maybury Mill, where there is a crosswalk there, but you can't even see the crosswalk as you're coming down the hill. You need to have some sort of lighting system there that allows students to cross. I think that the network that Chris referred to, connecting our Metro Park, which was part of that effort to, at the same time that we were going through and trying to get the bridge, we started the effort to get the Metro Park. I agree 100%. That has been totally underdeveloped. It's far behind in development. Campo approved this thing a long time ago and prioritized Forest Ridge Park. And all we have seen is the growth of Dorothea Dix, as well as some of the other parks that are inside the Beltway. It has been totally ignored. We want our park finished. We want it connected. We want connectivity and good connectivity back down to the Greenway. We need a coordinated network of bike lanes. Right now, you got bike lanes that don't connect back into other bike lanes. We need bike lanes to connect to other bike lanes that allow you to get very easily and quickly down to the Greenway, that protect you as you go down Falls of Neuse Road to the bridge, and then get access onto the Greenway there, just like Chris said. So I'm reiterating many of the points that she made, but I think the biggest takeaway for you guys is, number one, you need to think a little bit bigger, because that's a secondary arterial you're dealing with. You are not going to be able to go through and just slow down traffic. The traffic is going to increase. You're going to have more and more automobiles and trucks using that road as Capitol Boulevard becomes more and more congested. And that's the way it is. You're going to have speeding going through there. You have to have police that are going through there and doing enforcement. And you're going to need pedestrian bridges to allow pedestrians to move back and forth from one side of Falls of Neuse Road to the other. Crosswalks, pretty planners, those types of things, it's a great idea, and it's really good for a smaller community. But right now you're dealing with a secondary arterial that's designated as a secondary arterial. It's a state road below Wakefield here. So at the end of the day, I would encourage you to think at a little bit broader scale and think of Wakefield at a scale that perhaps you haven't thought about to date. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It's great. And just for clarity, this is Bill Schulbe, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Just want to make sure I'm connecting numbers to names.
No, that's correct.
Thank you for those comments. I was just checking our chat box. We're sort of approaching 7:30. Not seeing any sort of final comments or questions. I'll say really appreciate everyone spending their Thursday evening with us at this meeting. This public participation is what makes these processes. We can't do it without you. As we mentioned, we will be uploading this recording to the web. You can find that link on the project page that I shared earlier. We'll also have the questions that we asked available for a couple weeks. So if you want to refer back to the video, or you know someone who wasn't able to make it, please, we encourage you to share that link. We want to get some good response from the community and make sure we're headed in the right direction. And with that, I see Mike shared some additional information in the comments. I'll give folks a chance to read that, and then we will close out this meeting. So again, I appreciate everyone's attendance, and always feel free to reach out moving forward.